Hello, global gardeners. Welcome to another wonderful Monday. Got a lot to talk about today. We're going to be talking about favorite varieties of what we're growing in the garden. I'll share with you a number of mine, but I'm hoping this becomes a two-way or three-way or 200-way conversation where I'm not just sharing my favorite varieties, but you're also sharing your favorite varieties. So as we move forward, I'll definitely give you that opportunity. And let's have a nice chat about what we're growing in the garden. I see that there's a whole bunch of new people that are viewing. And so shout out to everybody that's new, either watching live here in the chat or watching on replay. Lori Norris is with us. Lynn W. from Canada. Nice to have you here. Josie B. is a new subscriber. And Melissa Sullivan has just joined as a Gardener Scott channel member. So appreciate all of you for that. And also want to give a shout out to Southern Gospel Men's Quartets as well. So if you're new, by all means, tell us about that in the comments, because this is a wonderful group of gardeners. And we like to welcome the new people, and also a good shout out to all the rest of you that are here on a regular basis. Heidi and Jay, our moderators, already doing a great job today. So nice to have you here. I'm actually beginning to think that my garden is almost entering springtime. So we've had some pretty good temperatures recently, and I've been outside. Yesterday I actually got a pretty good garden day outside. So hope you all are entering that territory as well, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. I see that Scott Head has joined us. So if you don't know the Scott Head gardening channel, Black Gumbo, check it out. Scott's in southern Texas and already having some great videos about some of the things that he's planning and planting and growing in his southern garden. So glad to have you here today, Scott. And Tony from Simplified Gardening, also another great gardening channel, is with us today. So shout out to you as well, Tony. Tony is in Wales in the UK, and also demonstrating some of his videos, some of what's happening in the garden right now. Most of you that know, but maybe for some of the new viewers, I'm in Colorado, Zone 5B, and some of my plants, my perennials, my strawberries, are just beginning to break dormancy. And my soil temperature is still too cold to do any active growing, but I'm getting close. The days are warming, the soil is warming, and hopefully we'll get there soon. I see Riverdale Gardens is with us. Nice to have you back as well. And lots of returning regulars. Hi, YD. And JBVRM Belinda. Nice to have you here. So let me throw out right off the bat one of my favorites that you've heard me say before. And as far as tomatoes go, it's Black Krim. Black Krim works for me here in Colorado. Black Krim actually comes from the Crimea. That's what the Krim means in the name. It's a Northern European type of tomato, and it does very well in my environment where we have cool spring, cool autumn, hot summer. It tends to match that region of the world. And so it's great for me. So if you have a similar growing climate as mine, I say grow Black Krim. But as we start talking about the varieties that are our favorites, I also want to caveat that choice as Black Krim, my favorite. It's not best for everybody. And so that's going to be part of the discussion today. Just because I have a favorite variety that does well in my garden, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will do best in your region. So as we start sharing some of our favorites, if you would, go ahead and tell us where you're from. And so let's start with the tomatoes. What's your favorite variety? And where are you growing that variety? So that all the rest of us that are watching now live or on replay can say, well, gee, my garden doesn't match Scott's Colorado garden. Instead, it matches somebody else that hopefully you'll start commenting here pretty soon, and say, instead of trying the black crim, I'm going to try another one. So let's see. Go ahead and pop them up. I want to see what your favorite tomatoes happen to be, and we'll use that as an example. Good point. So there's Central North Carolina from Zeke Moet. North Carolina, completely different growing environment than here in Colorado. And I have tried growing the Brandywine here in Colorado. Haven't had any success with it. Brandywine has a pretty long growing season, and my season is just too short to have success with the Brandywine. Delicious tomato. Absolutely wonderful tomato. So if you have a longer growing season, then yeah, I second that notion. Grow Brandywine in your garden. If you are in a cooler region like mine, maybe black crim would be your best option. So that's the focus for today. We're going to be sharing our information. And if you're wondering about what tomato varieties you're going to grow this year, look through the comments as they scroll past or in replay, and start making notes of the ones that maybe you're going to try. And so Lar in Zone 4B is talking about Mountain Rouge. And often you'll see in the name of the variety something about it. So I live in the mountains of Colorado. I haven't grown Mountain Rouge, but that tells me, especially if you're in Zone 4B, probably a cooler region, that the Mountain Rouge is a tomato that can handle cooler conditions, particularly in fall as we approach harvest. So as we take advice, and you hear me say this all the time, get multiple sources for your gardening information. Don't just blindly follow what I suggest, because my garden is different than your garden. And if you do it my way, you might not have the same success. But if you follow some of the rest, like Melissa Sullivan is saying, she's got the Brandywine in California as well. Those are the kind of things. Try to take the information from gardeners that are most like you when it comes to plant selection, and chances are you're going to have more success with it. So that's the underlying theme for the day, is for all of us to try to find varieties that we can match to our particular garden. And so using tomatoes as an example, when I released my video last year where I did that taste test of my 5 cherry tomatoes with the Sun Sugar and Sun Gold being the winners, I had a lot of suggestions about other tomatoes that I could be growing. And probably the one I got the most recommendations for was black cherry. And so my gardening buddy Frank gave me some black cherry tomato seeds, and I'm going to be adding that to my list this year of of plants that I'm growing. That's the way it works. I hadn't grown black cherry before, but I suddenly get a recommendation from a number of you, and Frank lives just down the road from me. It makes perfect sense for me to start growing black cherry tomatoes in my garden. And I'll definitely let you know how they do at the end of the season. So as we proceed, there's a lot of those kind of things that we can use to our benefit. So Scott Head says, if you want a huge yellow-orange slicer, a Mana Orange did well for his Texas 9A. I've actually had pretty good success with Kellogg's Breakfast, which is also an orange slicer. And so I haven't grown that particular one, Scott, but there you have it. If you're in a warm environment like Southern Texas and you like those big orange ones, there's one to try from Scott's suggestion. So I'd like to hear that. And Urban Chicken Mama is saying beefsteak is pretty popular in the Pacific Northwest. And so, again, the Pacific Northwest has a more moderate season than I do, and it tends to be longer. And so I don't have a lot of success with the beefsteak tomatoes just because my season is just too short. So let's move on to something else like asparagus. Now, asparagus is a perennial plant. When you choose it, you want it to last in your garden and do well for years. And as you look at asparagus, chances are, and you can share what you're growing if you're doing asparagus, you're going to find when you order your crowns from the different seed companies that the choices are relatively small. You might be able to find some Mary Washington asparagus seed, maybe some Mary Washington asparagus plants, but for the most part, the asparagus that you're going to be buying is a Jersey variety. And so what I bought was Jersey Night, and there's a reason for that. Partly because asparagus grows in most areas, and here in the United States, it's the Jersey varieties that we're growing. And most of the time when you buy a Jersey Night, they're clones from other plants, and they're all the same. And the focus of the asparagus is that you're buying male asparagus plants. Asparagus is one of those plants that actually has female plants and male plants. And so if you're growing nothing but male plants, then the roots of the plant are not putting energy into the flower production of a female plant. Female plants send up the flowers and the seeds. That takes the energy from the roots, which means the plant tends to be a little bit smaller. The spears that you're going to harvest are going to be a little bit smaller. But if you grow a male plant, it tends to be more robust. So that's why you'll often see Jersey something, Jersey Night in my case, as an asparagus plant to grow. So if any of you are growing asparagus other than Jersey Night, go ahead and let us know. And I'm not real sure, maybe you could help us out with this for those of you that are in the UK. So Tony, if you've got asparagus varieties that you would recommend, I'm not sure that you're growing the same Jersey, like New Jersey varieties that we're growing here in the States, but that would be helpful. And so the choices, when the choices are limited, so like when you go to order a plant like asparagus and you see that all of the seed companies are offering the same varieties, you can take that as a clue that those particular varieties will do well in most gardens. And so I've grown a number of varieties of plants over the years just because the selection was limited, and I tend to agree. If there's a very limited selection of plants, chances are they're going to do okay, and I've had great success with my Jersey Night asparagus. It's when you have 1,000 choices like tomatoes that you may need to focus in on some of the more important aspects. And Carol is saying purple passion asparagus does well in New Mexico. So that's good to know. New Mexico has some challenging environmental issues, so glad to hear that. I don't know that I've ever even really seen the purple asparagus, so that's awesome. Hot Pepper Paul is saying Mary Washington, there you go, and purple passion as well. So there you have it. I learned something new. I'll actually look into the purple passion and see if maybe it might be something that I can do in my area. And so Scott says he's never grown asparagus, but I highly suggest you doing it. So I think I might have mentioned this last week or the week before, but one of my most memorable garden moments was the first time I harvested my own fresh asparagus in late afternoon, early evening. Harvested it, took it direct into the kitchen, sauteed it with some olive oil and garlic, and still to this day, one of the most amazing meals I've ever made myself, because that fresh asparagus was just incredible. We all know what we grow ourselves tastes better than what you can buy, but there are some things that are just so incredible you never forget it. And asparagus, do it. You have to grow asparagus, because when you have those kind of moments, if you like asparagus from the store, grow your own. And it's a life-changing experience. It really is. So I definitely encourage it. But I'm interested about the purple passion. That's actually pretty amazing. So Tony is saying, I'm planting a new bed of it this year, waiting new crowns to come. The old bed doing well as well. So I'm glad to hear that. And so the varieties that Tony was mentioning conifers, colossal, black limb, and Pacific purple. And so that's one reason why I wanted to do this as well today, because we are truly a global audience. And often in my videos, I'll be talking about varieties, or I'll be highlighting what I'm growing. And I know it's different in other parts of the world, and I wish I could give you some of those specifics in my videos, but I just don't have the information. So that's why I'm asking you to share. So thank you for that, Tony. Those are some of the UK varieties that you can look for, and maybe that'll help you out if you're on that part of the world. So Heidi is saying, can you explain how to harvest the asparagus stalks for us that will be doing this for the first time? So absolutely. And so asparagus is one of those plants that you really need to plan for. Plan a spot that's going to be a permanent spot, because you can expect asparagus to be in that spot for decades, literally. Then you need to anticipate that it's going to be a couple years before you even should harvest the asparagus. So put them in year 1. In year 2, let the plants grow completely. Don't do anything to the plants. In year 3, you can begin harvesting some of those asparagus spears. Don't harvest more than a third of the spears, because they're still young plants and you want most of the energy to be going back into the roots. And then beginning with year 4, harvest half of the spears as they pop up. And then as the bed expands, because the roots will continue to grow, and every year you should get more spears, by year 5 and after, you can harvest more than half of the asparagus spears. The idea that you really need to think about, this is a living plant, and those spears are going to grow into the fronds, the beautiful foliage of asparagus. And those plants then, through photosynthesis, put the energy back into the roots for the next year to send up new spears. So if you harvest too much of your asparagus in any given year, you can expect that the next year the spears are going to be smaller, and you probably won't have as many of them, because the spears you get are coming from the energy that was produced by the plant in the previous year. So that's important to understand how asparagus works. And then there's a couple ways to do it. You can actually find some asparagus harvesting tools, which are little vertical knives, and you just take the spear and you can just stick that tool or any other knife, and you can just cut off the spear an inch or 2 below the surface of the soil. That's one way to harvest it. If you're going to use it fresh, most of the time when we buy asparagus, you know to snap off the bottom, because the bottom of the asparagus tends to be denser, maybe a little woody, and so you only want to eat the upper fresh variety, tender part of the asparagus. And so you can do that as part of the harvest. Go out, and instead of cutting the spear low down, you can go ahead and just snap it off at that same point on the plant and leave behind that little denser, woodier part. It does open up the plant, or that damaged and wounded part of the plant is now open, and yes, it could cause some issues with pests and potential diseases, though there aren't many that affect asparagus. But if you're going to use it fresh, straight from the garden to the kitchen, that can save you a step. Most of the time, we encourage that you harvest the entire spear, either at soil level or slightly below. And so in the early years, don't take as much. In the later years, you can take more. And that's how you harvest asparagus. Okay, let's see. Blue Roses, Diane F. is saying, I'm growing things I've never grown before, like squash and varieties of cherry tomatoes, celery, cabbage, and others. Can't wait to get growing in Pennsylvania. So good for you. And that's why I mentioned the black. I'd like you all to start thinking about growing some new things that you haven't grown before. And as we try to choose those new things we haven't grown before, we have to start somewhere. And so it's starting with a variety that others have told you they like. So let's talk beans. My favorite bean right now is rattlesnake. I love the taste and the look of the rattlesnake beans. And so this has evolved over time. I discovered rattlesnake beans at the Galileo Garden. And so I'd been gardening for 20 years and never knew about a rattlesnake bean, but saw it in a catalog, liked the idea, started growing it, and now it's my bean of choice. I think it's far superior than any other bean I've ever grown. So that's my favorite bean variety. Now, but as we see suggestions and throw out, Zeke is saying planting rattlesnakes this year. Scott says sowing rattlesnake beans this year for the first time. Definitely. Now all of a sudden people are like, okay, I got to try rattlesnake beans, and hopefully you'll like them as well. Riverdale is saying dragon tongue are my new favorite. So last year I only grew 2 types of beans, rattlesnake and dragon tongue. And so there's the substantiation, if you will, or the support from others, that when you start seeing gardeners like us who are doing some experimenting and trying some new things, and now a bunch of us are saying, oh yeah, I do that too. If you are looking for a new bean to try, this might be the place to start. Get some of the either rattlesnake or dragon tongue beans, grow them this year, and maybe you'll be a convert. Or if there's something else that you like, then next time, or even this time, go ahead and tell us about the variety of beans you like, if they're not rattlesnake or dragon tongue. And so there's Frank. Frank is saying, love rattlesnake beans also, and trying edamame this year. So there you go. Edamame is a wonderful plant to grow, and I've actually got edamame on my list as well this year to grow. I had the seeds last year and never put them in the ground, so hopefully this year I'll actually get some of those in my garden because it is a really nice one. Scott says Christmas lima did well for me, and so this is a good point. We were talking about the differences in our gardens, and so if you've got a very hot summer like Scott has, Christmas lima is on the list. And Ivan says, hello from the Texas Panhandle. So Ivan's one of those that if you're looking for a bean to grow in Texas, Christmas lima might be your particular choice. And since I'm in Colorado, M is also saying dragon tongue did well in Colorado. So you can see how this works. And you'll hear me say this many more times. Don't just follow a gardener's advice from YouTube just because they're on YouTube or a book or any other source that you happen to get information from. Do try to match it as much as you can with what you like, what you want, and how you're growing and your specific garden. And so that's really I'm probably gonna say it 2 more times throughout today. Is as you hear these varieties, do realize that they should be matched to your garden, coming from the people here that are suggesting it. So that will give you most success. Now, if you're in southern Texas and you want to grow rattlesnake beans, go for it. And if they don't do as well for you, well, there's a lesson to be learned. And then you're just like, what was that variety that Scott had suggested? And then you come back to this video, and next year you grow the Christmas limas. That's how we evolve. That's how we move through our gardening journey, is to keep trying these new things until we find one that we like. That's how I created my list of favorites, is by growing a number of them. And then suddenly one does so much better than everything else. Well, now it becomes my new favorite. And I'll continue to grow that, and then experiment with 1 or 2 each year if I can. And maybe I'll have a new favorite. So carrots, for instance. I'm currently listing Black Nebula as my favorite carrot. Now, it's a really dark purple carrot. And I like it. The taste is a little bit different than an orange carrot. I like the taste of the black nebula, but I really like cooking with it. I like roasted vegetables, and having the purple black nebula carrot in the same dish as a red beet, it's a little bit of surprise, because you're eating roasted root vegetables, and you think you're eating a beet, but then it's a carrot, or you think you're eating a carrot and then it's a beet. And I just like that mouth surprise when you have something that tastes really good and it's a little bit unexpected. So that's one of the reasons right now why that purple carrot is my variety. I have no doubt I'm going to change. I used to really like the short and sweet carrots, because they're easy to grow, they're short, they're sweet, they're perfect for cooking and using in salads. That's a marvelous one. And there's 5 or 6 other carrot varieties that I've grown in the last 10 years, being happy with most of what I was growing, but always looking for that favorite, the one that I know I'm going to be growing the next year. And so that's how I approach this list of favorites. As you sit down and make your gardening plan, make your list of favorites. And so right off the bat, you know what you're going to be growing in your garden. And so you figure out, based on your list of favorites, how many plants you're going to grow, and come up with your electronic plan or your pen and paper plan as to where you're going to put those plants. And then, how much space do you have left over? If you have leftover space, now you start looking into that. Well, so what am I going to try this year? What's new? What have I found from somebody else's suggestion that I want to put into my garden? And that's how I approach it. As opposed to many of us that just randomly choose plants every year. And then at the end of the season, what if you didn't really find anything that you like? And now you've had a whole gardening season without that great taste sensation or that memorable harvest moment. That's why I like to identify favorites and try to grow favorites every year, because it gives you that success. It gives you those happy moments. And then the other stuff is the extra. That's the part of gardening that makes you better, is when you make sure you have that extra space in your garden to grow a different type of carrot or a different variety of bean or whatever else it happens to be. So there's some good concepts there. Tammy's saying my friend's son grows carrots and he's 9. Awesome. Loves the black purple carrots, and they grow very well for him. And that's another big reason. When I did my purple garden video, that was one of the reasons that I grow my purple plants. It's for my granddaughters, because they love harvesting the purple carrots. Now, a caveat, I think I might have mentioned this once before in the past. Mala has discovered that she likes carrots as well. And so I had left some of those purple carrots in the ground to go to seed this year so I could harvest the seeds and continue growing those purple carrots. And she figured out that she could dig them up in winter and chew on them. But because it's cold and snowy outside, she brings them into the house. Well, some of those purple carrots can actually leave little purple stains on your carpet. So be aware of that with kids or animals with these deep, dark purple carrots, that you have to be a little bit careful about staining. So Mala had no idea what she was doing, but now I can tell every time she stole a carrot and brought it into the house to eat it. So it's something to think about. Scott says, I see no point in growing varieties I can buy at the store for cheap. I prefer the colorful carrots. There you go. Exactly. And so that was actually one of the points I made in that video week before last about choosing plants and what plants not to grow. And one of the plants I suggested that you think about is carrots. And that I don't grow orange carrots because you can buy them at the store. And so if I want orange carrots, I'm not growing them in my garden. That has evolved as I've made these favorite lists of mine. And instead I focus on the purple ones. So I completely agree with you. The carrots I grow are the colorful ones, the unique ones that you can't get at the store. Or if you find them at the store, they're way more expensive than the generic orange ones. So if you've got a limited amount of space to grow any plant, carrots in this example, yeah, absolutely. Don't grow the orange ones that you can find everywhere for cheap. Grow the cool ones, the purple ones. I've got a Kyoto red that I showed in the video over the weekend. I'm going to be growing a Kyoto red carrot. I've never grown red carrots. And so that's on my list of experiments this year, is growing that particular type of carrot. That's how I think you should consider approaching your garden. Grow those favorites of yours, which are probably colorful and unique, and then just start adding to it. So let's see what else we have popping up here. Josie's saying walking onions grow wild in Georgia. That's awesome. So I actually don't have a favorite onion at this particular time. I've had a lot of people suggest walking onions to me, and I actually got some walking onions to start last year, but I waited too long and they ended up rotting before I could get them in the ground because they were given to me quite early. But there you have it. Walking onions is one that's also been recommended to me as a wonderful plant to be growing in the garden. How about beets? I didn't really grow up eating beets. Didn't eat beets most of my life. Discovered some pretty good beet dishes at some restaurants. Started growing beets. And so the beet I grew was Detroit Red, because that's what you see. If you go to any of the box stores, you're going to see the rows of seeds, and in the beet section, you're going to see Detroit Red beets. So that's what I grew, and I liked them. They worked pretty well, and I grew red beets for quite a few years. And then I branched out and discovered golden beets. Burpee's golden beets are just amazing. And so that became my new favorite. Last year, I grew more golden beets than I grew red beets. And I'll do the same thing this year. I'm going to try some other varieties. I grew the Chioggia, which is a red and white beet last year. And it did pretty well in my garden. And I liked the flavor, but I know that I prefer the yellow beet, that golden beet. And so while I might be growing 3 different varieties of beets, I'm growing more of the one that I know that I like to eat. And when I make the roasted root vegetables, the golden beets are clearly the favorite of my family when they eat the roasted vegetables. So I'm going to continue to grow it. It's definitely my favorite when I eat the roasted. And so beets are often what we grow up with. And so if you've grown up eating red beets and you really don't know much else but red beets, start thinking beyond that. And if you can grow a red beet, you can grow a golden beet. And I strongly encourage that you grow golden beets because they'll change your world. Susan says, I love beets roasted, pickled, canned. They are so good. And they really are. And again, this is a perfect example of what I grew up with. And the reason I never liked beets is because the only beets I knew were the ones that were in a can and packed in water and just terrible. Mushy. That's not a beet. A beet is what you harvest out of the ground from your own garden and then cook it and pickle it and can it, and it really is a delicious way to eat beets. And how about cucumbers? Cucumbers are another one of those plants that most of us are growing, and we'll typically get what we see at the store. And sometimes that is the one to get. My favorite cucumber is Market More, or Market More 76. And those are so common, so prevalent, that at least in the States, you see them everywhere. Well, there's a reason for that, because it's a great variety of cucumber to grow. It's long, it's straight, it has delicious flavor, very prolific, at least in my garden, and I'm guessing in most gardens. And so that's a great variety to grow. I do the Boston pickling cucumber and harvest them a little bit smaller. They're designed for pickling. So when I want to make pickles, I do the Boston pickling. When I want sliced cucumbers for my salad, it's the Market More. And I've tried a number of other cucumbers over the years. Straight 8 is another great variety you see, very common, but I've learned that I prefer the Market More over the Straight 8. And so I've probably grown Market More for at least 10 years now because I just have good success with it. And so what kind of cucumbers are you doing? Doris says, love the Boston pickling cucumbers. Yeah, because they're just those that we we have available to grow. And the nice thing about the Market More and the Boston pickling, and so as you are starting to develop your list of favorites, if you can choose the varieties that are open pollinated, that allow you to save the seeds and then grow those same plants the next year, I think that's the best of both worlds. Not only are you getting something that you like, that is one of your favorites, but now you're saving money. You're saving the seeds and never having to buy those plants ever again. What's better than that when it comes to gardening? So the Boston pickling and the Market More fall into that category. And as you probably saw, I have saved the seeds from those. Scott says, I did not like the Armenian cucumbers. They were powdery mildew magnets. And I would agree with that. I've actually tried to grow the Armenian cucumbers, I think 3 times now, and just not had the success that they through blossom drop, or because the cucumbers just didn't fully develop, or powdery mildew. I agree. I had a lot of problem with powdery mildew on my Armenian cucumbers. And so that comes into the analysis as you pick your favorites is eliminate the ones that don't work. And you don't have to keep trying those. And so I've tried the Armenian 3 times now, and I don't think I'm going to try them again. I might, but if my garden has limited space for what I want to grow or my time, then why not choose the ones that you know are going to do better, or at least the ones that can change your mind and give you a new impression about a particular type of fruit or vegetable. And so, yeah, I agree, Scott. It's one of those that I'm not going to be doing it anymore. It's just as simple as that. So Blue Roses Diane F says, eggplants are my favorite to eat, growing 3 different kinds this year. And so I grew a few different varieties last year. I've grown a handful over the years. Diamond eggplants are my new favorite. And so delicious fruit, easy to grow in my region. And so this year I'll be growing not as many eggplants as I did last year, but I'll be growing eggplant. And I'm actually not planning on growing anything other than the diamond eggplant. And so and I'd be interested, come back in the future, of those 3 that you're growing this year, what's your favorite? Or are you going to find a new favorite at the end of the season after you've grown 3 different varieties? Because I actually think that's a great way to do it. Okay, let's keep rolling along. Lars says, eggplants don't grow for me. You know, and that used to be, they didn't used to grow for me either. And then I figured out that the soil needed to be better, and I needed a sunnier location, and I needed to be a little more on top of things for the watering to always keep it moist, and choosing a variety that does well in my area, like the diamond. And so I say give it another try, Lar, because I actually had amazing success last year, best ever, once I figured out what I'd been doing wrong, or at least not as good in all of those previous years. Janan was saying, or is saying, I was listening to live while I was doing my garden chores this morning, so I'll have to go back and see what you all said for tomatoes. So yeah, we started with tomatoes, and you can pop back and catch up with us. Riverdale says, diamond eggplant is my new favorite as well. I also really like Rosita. Okay, that's good. I haven't done the Rosita. So that's a good suggestion. Like I said, I'm not planning on growing a lot, but I'll add Rosita to my list of ones that I want to try. Mage Greywolf says, sweet potatoes are one of my favorites from my area. I harvest the leaves for salads, stir fries, and sandwiches while I wait for the roots. Awesome. And if you have a favorite variety, I know that there aren't as many different varieties of sweet potatoes as something like tomatoes. But as I've said in recent videos, sweet potatoes are a challenge in my area. And so They are not on my list. I can't give you a specific recommendation for sweet potatoes. I'm going to continue trying and growing them, and I want to have some dedicated space. I'm actually getting, hopefully getting a new metal bed to put into my garden, and I'm designating that new bed as my sweet potato bed. And so we'll see what kind of success I can get with sweet potatoes in my challenging environment. Okay, let's see. Zucchinis. Zucchini is one of those plants that courgette, I think it is in the UK. Black Beauty is one that I've settled on. I've grown a number of different types of zucchinis over the years, and Black Beauty is my go-to zucchini. And that's all I grew last year, and that's all I'm planning on growing this year. And it's great. And so as part of being a gardener, and I've already said, I encourage that experimentation. I encourage you trying to find one that's always better, trying to find that next new favorite. But I'm happy with the Black Beauty zucchinis. And really, as zucchinis go, it's as good as I think I can ever find. I may find better, but it's not worth experimenting, and I'm happy with it. So this is one of those plants. It's a favorite. It's on my list. It's at least in the foreseeable future. It's not going to change, and I'll continue growing and growing and growing the Black Beauty zucchinis and be happy with that. I'll be trying new varieties of other squashes this year. I like the yellow crookneck squash. It's been very successful for me, but I want to try some new ones to see if they might do well. In the last couple of years, I've grown some of those really interesting Italian varieties with the scalloped edges. I grew a scallop squash just last year. It was a little challenging for me, not to grow, but to eat. The scallop squash, I had some difficulty figuring out how to cook with it. You know, my yellow crookneck, I just slice into chunks and put it in with some onions and garlic and olive oil, and that's how I eat most of my squash. But those scalloped squashes didn't cut so well, and the pieces didn't look quite right. Now, I'm not saying it's not a good tasting squash, but that was another factor, was how I cook with it and whether it really matched my style of cooking. So I'm not planning on growing the scallop squashes this year just because it just didn't fit with what I was expecting to see on my plate or to put into my skillet. So, you know, throw that into your analysis as well. Butternut squash is my favorite winter squash. I grow that every year because it just tastes so good and it stores so well, and it does well in my garden. The Waltham butternut squash is my go-to variety, and I'm not going to change that. I've tried a few other types of butternuts, but the Waltham for my area is the butternut squash of choice. And so if you are going to grow winter squashes, I seriously suggest that you try the butternuts. And if you're going to try a butternut, consider trying the Waltham. So what else have you got out there on the way of the squashes? Bobby says the crookneck, straight neck, and scallop squash grow well for me. So thank you for that. Another substantiation. That's one of those things. Anadin says butternut is great. Absolutely. I love making fresh butternut squash soup. It just really is another one of those culinary moments that has its literal roots in the garden. And so as you're eating that soup, you're reliving the garden. And so I think the last butternut squash soup I made was in January. And as I was eating it, I was reliving the summer last year. It just tasted like the garden. And that's why I grow it every year, because it does so good. Hey, Pat, nice to see you here. Do you have a favorite spaghetti variety? Planting date only 2 weeks away. So I don't. I actually, I've been trying a few different types of spaghetti varieties and haven't come across one that is clearly a favorite or one that I'm going to keep growing. And so I can't give you a specific variety because I just see what's out there and grab the spaghetti squash, and I've had pretty consistent results regardless of the variety I'm choosing. And so, if any of you have a specific spaghetti variety, definitely throw it out to Pat, so that they can have that nice spaghetti squash. Another great squash to grow. I love the spaghetti squash. Same kind of thing. You can make a spaghetti, so to speak, but you cook up your spaghetti squash, and you get your fork and you scoop out all of those strings of the spaghetti squash, and then you take that with some olive oil and some of the fresh garlic and tomatoes and basil from your garden, and that's another one of those culinary moments that you're just eating your garden literally, but just enjoying every bite. So I'm glad you mentioned spaghetti squash, but I'm sorry I can't give you a specific variety. Wonderful to grow. I didn't grow spaghetti squash last year, but it's definitely on my list this year, and one of those that I'm planning to grow. So let's see. Wasabi Gal says, I like the delicata squash. You know, I got some delicata seeds and actually never ended up putting them in the ground. So that is actually one for me maybe to try again. And Marie says, would anyone want to give some tips for starting strawberry bed? I find it a bit challenging, but my children would like to have one. So do it, definitely. Strawberries as a perennial plant, kind of like the asparagus, try to choose a location that you know is where you want it, because they're going to be in place for years to come. A general guideline is that the strawberry plants are going to last for about 3 years before you should rotate them and put in new plants in place of them. And the variety I like is Quinault. Now, I've actually got 5 different types of varieties of strawberry in my garden right now, because I'm trying to find one as good as Quinault. Cavendish, I put a lot of Cavendish strawberry plants in this last year, partly because of recommendations from other gardeners. And I didn't have much success with Cavendish, not like the success I had with Quinault. And so as for starting a new bed, make sure that you've got nice, good, rich soil. Put the strawberry crowns in. Make sure that you don't put soil over the crown. That's the top part of the root that actually is a little bulbous and sticks up. That should be above the ground. The roots should be below the ground. Mulch the bed so it stays evenly moist, and strawberries in most areas actually do pretty well. And so depending on your zone, you might want to try to choose a variety to match your zone, especially if you're in a colder zone like zone 4. But for me in zone 5, Quinault is my strawberry of choice. And so for those of you who might be in warmer regions, go ahead and throw out what your favorite strawberry variety is. But another aspect, especially as the kids are concerned, I have my main strawberry bed as you enter my garden. My archway entrance has the beds, and in those beds I grow my strawberries. Because every time my grandkids come to visit, that's how they enter the garden. And they know if they see a ripe strawberry, it's theirs for picking. And so I like that kind of gardening where you have kids that are involved with it. Make the kid-friendly plants like strawberry accessible for the kids, and add a place in the garden where it's easy for them to harvest whatever it happens to be. The main vegetable garden in my area, I'm always putting peas in right there on the edge of the bed for the same reason. To let my granddaughters walk into the bed. First plant they see are peas. The pea pods are right there, and they can pluck those pea pods off and eat them fresh in the garden. So there's a couple ideas I would throw at you in thinking about how to get a strawberry bed started, especially for some of those kids. Scott says, I got some squashes from a South Anna butternut hybrid. It's got Seminole pumpkin in its genes. But the vine borer's got most of it. And so that's actually an interesting point, Scott. I don't have a lot of pest issues. And so as I choose varieties, the pest resistance is actually pretty low on my list. But as you're choosing your varieties to grow, pest resistance may be much higher on your list. And so as you're trying something like a South Anna butternut, if the borers are just devastating those plants, don't grow those plants anymore and try to find something else that might be a little more resistant, and you may have more success. And you'll often find that as you're looking in the catalogs or going to the nurseries, they're asking questions. Disease resistance and pest resistance are definitely considerations that you should be asking about when you're choosing your specific varieties. So since I was just talking about peas, the pea that I like growing, that I can just pluck off the plant and enjoy it fresh in the garden, is an Oregon sugar pea. And so that's my current favorite. I've got a few others that I like to grow, but as far as just make sure you put an Oregon sugar pea in the garden so that when I or the family go in, they're going to be growing. I've had some really good success with that. And they grow well in my cold springs. Cold spring, when I put them in the ground, it's still usually a possibility of snow when I'm planting my peas. And the Oregon does extremely well. So add that to the list of crops that I like to grow. Leslie says, only crop that I struggle with pests is kale in Colorado. And I've had some issues with the pests on the kale here in my Colorado garden, but it hasn't been that bad. I've had some pirate bugs and haven't had a big aphid problem, but I just grow a lot of kale. And this is one approach. If you do have pests, or if you don't have many pests but you see that they like a particular plant, I just grow more of those. And so as far as my kale is concerned, I'll grow kale in a number of different beds. And the dinosaur kale is actually kind of fun to grow when you've got the kids that are going to be harvesting the leaves. But I'll have some kale plants that have insects on it, but because I'm growing it in a number of different areas, there's always at least one area, one bed that isn't getting the pest problem. And so if you want the pretty looking leaves, those are the ones that I tend to harvest from. And so Tony says whiteflies are the biggest pest problem that he has for kale. And I did it around my eggplants. That may be one reason why my eggplants did so well. And I also did it in my bed with the turnips and the kale, because my turnips were really being hit by the whiteflies last year. But I was using the yellow sticky traps in the garden, and they actually did pretty well, keeping some of those whitefly problems under control. But I don't have a big whitefly problem, so that may be why a few sticky traps can actually work well for me. And so hope that works well for you. And so Mage Grey Wolf says, Black Magic Kale will be replacing my Dino Kale. So cool. And I've been tempted. I saw the Black Magic Kale in a catalog and almost bought them, but I still have so many kale seeds from the last couple of years that I'm going to put that off a year. So I may be giving the Black Magic Kale a try here pretty soon as well. So while I'm thinking about it, let me go ahead and talk about the background today. This comes from Holly Morale. This is a Southern California garden, and it's just at sunset. Been having all the snowy pictures in recent months from you and from my own garden. And so last week I put the call out for some new backgrounds with your gardens, and particularly if they were growing green. And I thank you for those of you that sent me photos. I'll be showing more in the next couple weeks. And if you've got a background photo you'd like me to show, send it to gardenerscott@gardenerscott.com. Make sure you tell me a little bit about it, and more specifically, give me permission to use it. And Holly did that. So I'm glad to start off our late winter, almost springtime, with this Southern California garden. Beautiful garden space. This is obviously one of those gardens that you would want to walk through. Look at this beautiful garden space, and you just want to be there. I definitely want to be there. And so primarily they've got these metal beds, and you can see the metal beds in the background. They do have a wood bed that you can't see. Also over here, this is a nice option to have a brick or stone border around some of the plants you're growing. I really like that look. They've got the fruit trees growing in the background. They have their compost pile with the pallets back in that area over there. And this is just a really nice space just over the shoulder. They actually have some tomatoes growing. Now, for the most part, she said that they're growing the cool season plants. And so the video I just did talking about the seeds that you can start before your last frost date. Well, when you're in Southern California, a Zone 9 garden, you don't have those kind of concerns. You can garden all year round. But winter tends to be the time of year that you're going to be growing a lot of those cool season plants, those peas and the kale and the beets and those kind of plants. And so that's one reason why there's so much active growing, is because they can do that in Southern California. But also in the shoulder season, usually the fall and the spring, they can do tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and some of those others that the rest of us have to wait until midsummer to actually start seeing some of that growth. So I appreciate you sharing this picture with us, Holly. And you can see the metal framework they have around the garden that really helps make, especially over here, if you're growing taller plants, having a setup like that you can cover with shade cloth, that you can have the twine or wires coming down and use as trellis. Fantastic design. So this looks like a pretty big garden space, and you can see they've taken some effort to put this structure, these structures in place, and particularly with the metal beds, thinking long term. And so as far as a garden planning idea, if you know you're going to be putting beds in a particular area of your garden, and you know you're going to be gardening for years to come, start thinking about also putting in some of these support structures, and maybe doing the metal beds versus the wooden beds if you like the raised bed ideas. So lots of really nice things to see in this garden. And then also little things like this little pot. I don't know if those are onions or garlic that is growing in that little container. There's also a container right here. There's also on this side, in this lower corner, there's a container here. There's a container right there. Do that. Throw containers all around your garden and grow all of those other plants that you might not have a dedicated bed for, but you can grow onions and garlic and flowers and carrots and all kinds of plants in containers that are interspersed throughout your garden. And that not only expands your square feet, the footprint of your garden, but it adds variety. And I think it adds a nice visual variety as well. And so you can see that in Holly's garden. She actually apologized for this orange tree that they had cut down, but I don't see anything wrong with that. I do a lot of that as well. When I'm cutting down a tree or a bush or cleaning up areas of my garden, I'll let it rest in my garden for a while. And as the leaves dry, they actually add mulch to the pathways. Maybe some of it becomes food for the worms, but don't feel bad if you have a mess, quote unquote, in your garden. It actually can benefit the garden, all that organic matter, until you can get it to your compost pile, or maybe chip it up to use as mulch, or to find some other use for it. Yeah, it's okay to have piles in your garden. So I actually think it looks kind of nice. It adds some color, and I know that those organic materials will find a way into your garden, because I can see the things like the compost and the wood chip mulch and all the other things that you're using. So look at this picture. You may see some things that I didn't point out, but a nice way to move forward in the gardening week as we start thinking about what we're doing in our garden as spring is approaching. And it helped brighten my day to see color and green growing in someone's garden, because I'm still weeks away from that happening. Okay, that's it. So Llama is saying, is that conduit? And so actually, to me, it looks like it's the fencing supports for like a chain link fence. So conduit, you might be able to find inch or inch and a quarter conduit, and this could be a bigger conduit, but I'm looking at some of those vertical supports that look like they're a little bit bigger, and it looks to be about the size of the chain link fence material that you would buy from one of the home centers. And the reason I say that is because at the Galileo garden, I had a similar setup using this same type of vertical support that is long, and it was for chain link fence. And that's what I actually used to support the shade cloth in some areas of the garden, and also used it as trellis support in other areas of the garden. So the conduit, especially if you have a really wide span like this, the conduit can bend because it's not that thick, whereas the chain link metal is a little bit stronger and it won't bend. So that's my guess. And maybe Holly will join us if she's not already here or in replay and can answer that question. So you can see it in the comments either here with us or in the replay as to exactly what that is. And so Zeke says it looks like top rail and canopy fittings. So all those are good choices. So regardless of what it is, the idea is to choose something that is durable and strong. And while conduit is a very common thing we use, I use conduit, bend it into hoops. It's not necessarily the strength we need for support in other areas of the garden. So use what you know that you can work with. And yeah, Frank's right, and that's kind of what I'm talking about is 8-foot galvanized posts, those kind of things that are strong and sturdy and will last a long time in your garden. So Leslie's wondering about peppers, and so I did a whole video about it last year because my favorite pepper is the shishito pepper. I grow a ton of different peppers. I think, I forget, I think I grew 9 or 12 different varieties of peppers last year. I honestly forget. But shishito was clearly my favorite. Now, for years, cayenne pepper has been my favorite because it does so well in my garden that I grow cayenne peppers, dry them, and then use them in cooking throughout the year. So as a favorite, cayenne has been one of my favorites for years. Not necessarily because of the taste, but just because it does so well in my garden. I can have a successful harvest of cayenne peppers and always have been able to in my garden. But this last year, after having discovered shishitos, nothing beats the flavor of a fresh shishito pepper that's charred and fresh and salt and a little olive oil, and that's what I talk about in that video. So that's my particular favorite when we talk about peppers. I haven't had very good success with bell peppers. Now at the Galileo garden, I was able to grow some orange peppers and some red peppers and some purple peppers that did okay, but never had the great success outside to find one that I would say, yes, grow this in Colorado. It does great. I'll be growing some more peppers this year in my greenhouse to try to identify one that does well in the greenhouse, because that's where I was growing them at Galileo, was in the greenhouse. But the general peppers that do well in my area are the hot peppers. Early jalapeno has done great for me in recent years. And so that was one of the varieties I grew last year, was the early jalapeno peppers. And with the cayenne and with the shishito, I would say those 3 pepper types really were the bulk of my harvest. I did some poblano that did okay. I did some Anaheim that did okay, but not as well as the others, and they just can't beat the taste of the shishito. So shishito is definitely the ones that I'm encouraging at this point. And Connie says, I'm trying shishito for the first time, about 1 inch tall. Awesome. I'll be starting the peppers this week. I think that's what my calendar says. And so I'm looking forward to the point when they get to be about an inch tall. That's great. So, and Claudia says going to try cayennes this year. So I hope you have as good success with the cayennes as I have. Blue Roses Diana says earlier jalapeno works good for her too. And so there you have it. So jalapenos are a great pepper to grow. I use jalapenos in a number of different ways. I pickle my jalapenos. I dry my jalapenos. I freeze my jalapenos. I use a lot of jalapenos fresh. And so if you like that little bit of heat, jalapenos are a way to go. And it looks like there are others that agree that the early jalapeno is one that tends to be pretty good. Jetty Eddie, good morning back at you. Glad that you're here today. Melissa says, I did grow habanada last year, but wasn't impressed with the plant's vitality. So let's see if Scott pops up. I think Scott Head, I kind of remember you saying something about growing a habanado. And I actually have grown habaneros in the greenhouse at Galileo with great success. And but I haven't done the habanada. And so that's an interesting one to be trying. Let's see what else. So I covered the things that I wanted to talk about. Pumpkins. And so I grow two different types of pumpkins generally. I grow the jack-o'-lantern variety so that the grandkids can have pumpkins to carve at Halloween. And then I also grow the New England sugar pumpkin that I can make into pumpkin pie. And so that I made that video years ago. I'm guessing you haven't seen it because it doesn't have very many views. But I show making the pumpkin pie from the pumpkin I harvest in my garden. So I start the video harvesting the pumpkin, take it into the kitchen, and then show you how to make a pumpkin pie from the pumpkin that you harvest. And the New England sugar pumpkin is the one that I've found does best for me and just makes incredibly delicious pumpkin pies. So last year, those are the two varieties I grew. I grew jack-o'-lantern and I grew the New England sugar and had pretty good crops, and the kids got to carve some pumpkins and I got to make some pumpkin pie. So what's better than that? Okay, let's see. Masabi Gal says batwing pumpkins are fun because of their black and orange splotches. That's cool. And actually there's, is it ghost pumpkin? The white pumpkins. I grew those at the school, and the kids really loved the white pumpkin. So I like the idea of the black and orange splotches. I haven't seen that one, so that's actually a cool idea. But that gets to that, why are you growing pumpkins? So if you're growing pumpkins for Halloween for the kids, then yeah, do the batwing orange and black splotchy. That actually sounds really cool. Or grow an all white ghost pumpkin. Those are really cool too. And they, so the idea of what makes a favorite. Why is it your favorite variety? And as I've already talked about, sometimes it's taste. It's not always taste. Sometimes it's what does best in your garden. Sometimes it's just what's cool to look at and what the kids get excited about, like the purple carrots. So lots of different reasons of why we choose the plants we choose and why you choose the ones you choose as your favorites. And these are some of the ones that I've highlighted. Let's see, raspberries. Raspberries are a crop that can do well for most of us. They are sensitive to soil pH. And so if you have acidic soil, you would be better growing blueberries than raspberries, for instance. A neutral to alkaline soil, you'd be better growing raspberries than blueberries. And so it varies depending on what you want to grow. Berries, I think, are great to grow in a garden. You should be growing as many berries as you can. And the raspberry that I grow is Heritage. Heritage is an ever-bearing variety of raspberry, which does great in my garden. And so as you look at the different types of raspberries, I like the ever-bearing varieties because they can fruit on the primo cane. That's the first year's cane. And so I know every year the brand new shoots coming up are going to give me a crop that year. But you can also leave those canes over winter, and they'll begin growing, sending out leaves and flowers, and you'll get a second crop on the flora canes, the second year canes in summer. And so for those ever-bearing varieties like the Heritage, you can get a summer crop and a fall crop, just depending on whether it's the new cane or the older cane. Now, the reason I like Heritage as this particular type of raspberry that fruits on the first year canes is because in Colorado, at least in my area, we have raspberry cane borer, which is a pest that will kill your entire crop. And it overwinters in the older canes. And so I have to rely on a raspberry that is going to give me fruit the first year, because if I leave those canes up, there's no guarantee I'm going to get a crop. And so the very first raspberries I grew were not the ever-bearing varieties, and I lost entire crops to the raspberry cane borer. That's no fun. That's when I discovered the Heritage variety. Love it, and have encouraged many others to grow it, and the people I know, at least in my area that grow it, love it. So raspberries can be a little finicky depending on where you live and what your soil pH is and whether you have a pest that attacks your raspberries, but that's my favorite. That's one of the ones that does extremely well for me, so I go with it. Llama Llama says fall gold raspberries are flourishing and so good. Nice to hear it. I actually have a gold raspberry. I don't think it's the fall gold. I just put it in this last year, and it seems to be doing okay, but I'm glad you're having it. I haven't been able to harvest much of the gold raspberries yet since they just went in, but I'm looking forward to having a good crop this year. So if mine don't do well, I'll look into the fall gold. That's a nice suggestion to have. Shandy's Garden, I tried natopeno and habanada peppers and looked so forward to them, but they tasted like bell peppers. Could that be my Southwest Ohio area? Didn't even bother saving the seeds. And so there is some correlation to your soil and how you water when you're growing hot peppers. But even if you're doing it right, if your hot pepper isn't hot, it's probably a bad batch of seeds, or the genetics were screwed up a little bit, or it was mislabeled. Even if you do everything wrong, your hot pepper should still taste hot. So I'm guessing that there might have been a lot of factors involved, particularly with the hot peppers. If they're overwatered, if you just water them a lot, they're not going to be as hot. They like to be stressed a little bit. They like that heat of summer, and they like to have the soil dry out in between waterings. That's going to make them hotter. And so maybe if your soil was particularly rich and moist all the time, that could explain why they weren't as hot. But as to the flavor, that's usually genetic, and it's usually the seed that determines the flavor, regardless of what other conditions you might be doing in your garden. So not sure exactly what that situation was, but I'm guessing those may be some of the issues. Okay, let's see. I'm scrolling down now. Oh, there you have it. Susan says the natopeno and habanada are not supposed to be hot. So there you go. I didn't know that. I haven't grown those. So thank you, Susan. And there you have it. It's the genetics. It's the fact that pepper seed wasn't going to be producing a hot pepper. And so regardless of what you did, you weren't going to get a hot pepper. So thank you, Susan. I appreciate you offering that information. So that's where growing if you want the habanero pepper, you grow habanero, and if you want a jalapeno pepper, then you grow a jalapeno. Sometimes these hybrids, these varieties that are developed, are to make it bigger, smaller, different color. But yeah, that makes sense that the habanada, like nada, like nothing. So the habanero, nothing. That would make sense that it would be a pepper without heat. And a lot of times those hot peppers, that heat is what gives it the primary flavor. And maybe that's why you didn't like the taste of it. So interesting. There, we all learned a little something. Thank you. Appreciate that, Susan. Okay, so yeah, it's for those who just want the flavor and the color. So nice to know that. Sarah's Garden, habanero tastes so good. I can see the appeal for the heatless ones, but I love the spice. Yeah, you know, and it's so I was growing the habaneros at the school garden until I was told I couldn't grow the habaneros anymore, and it was because kids would come out to the garden and they would help plant and they would help manage the plants, and I had some habaneros growing in the greenhouse. Never thought I needed to say it, but I had this group of 3 boys that plucked off some of those habanero peppers, put them in their pockets, and went back to class, and then began daring each other to eat the habanero peppers. And one of the boys did, and took a big bite, full bite of the habanero pepper, and couldn't handle it, collapsed on the floor, had to be taken to the nurse's office. The heat was too intense, and the principal called me into the office and said, stop growing habanero peppers. So that's one of those things about school gardens that you have to be careful about, anticipating how the kids are going to act, and you can't always anticipate all of the actions. So I had really good success with the habaneros in the greenhouse at that school, but couldn't grow them anymore, or any of the other hot peppers, because you never know when a boy is going to challenge another one to eat it. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, I agree with hot pepper. Paul, it's been mentioned before, but the shishito pepper is the best tasting non-hot pepper. And you know, it's funny. The statistics, I've seen this on a number of different sites. Some say 1 out of 5 of the shishito peppers is hot, or 1 out of 10 of the shishito peppers are hot. I would put it closer to 1 out of 50, or maybe 1 out of 100. I went most of the season last year without a hot shishito pepper, but occasionally you have one. And again, it's the genetics. Sometimes it's another aspect, but when you have an entire plant and none of them are hot, and then suddenly you get one hot pepper, it's an anomaly. So just be aware, even with these non-hot varieties, it is possible that you may have a single pepper on a plant that does have some heat to it. And so I had a few people comment on that video last year that when I'm saying that it's a non-hot pepper and you don't have to worry about it, I had a few people say, oh, it's hot. I've had some that burned my mouth. Well, that's the anomaly. Be aware of that going into it. But I agree, Paul, the shishito is a tremendous not hot pepper. So, okay. Let's see. Nero. Hello, just started watching the channel. I'm in zone 9B. Nice to have you here, Nero. I'm so glad you're joining us. And as we were talking about the garden behind me and Scott Head's garden, there's a lot of zone 9 gardeners here that are sharing information. So it's nice to have you here. And it's so great to be sharing the information. Mage Grey Wolf, Brazilian star pepper was interesting. One side was not hot and the other side of the same pepper was hot. That's interesting. I haven't seen that before. So, was it the whole plant or just some individual peppers? That's really an interesting idea that it could be different on an individual pepper. Leslie's saying pruning the heritage raspberry. Good question. So that's one reason why I like the heritage raspberry, because if I leave my canes up over winter, there's the possibility that the cane borer will be in those canes. The pupa will eat it from the inside out, and the canes just fall over. That's why you don't get any raspberries. So with those ever-bearing varieties of raspberries, you can cut them off at the ground every year, and I do that most of the time. Just hack all of my raspberry canes to the ground, and then the canes, the dried canes, I usually do this in late winter, about now actually, and I'll take those canes, I'll use them to fill my beds from the bottom. I'll use them as mulch in other areas. I throw them in the compost pile. I find a use for them in my garden. But my raspberry patch going into spring, looks like bare ground, just the mulch on top of it, because I've pruned them all the way down. And then the new growth in spring grows pretty quickly through the summer, and then in fall I get a harvest of raspberries. So that's how to prune them if you have a pest problem like I do. Or you can leave the canes up in winter, and those are the ones that are going to give you that summer crop. Just be aware that the next year you should prune those off, because you've gotten 2 years worth of harvest from that single cane. So you can either hack them all down or let them grow in the second year, get a harvest, and then hack them down. But then you have to keep track of the new ones and the old ones, and it's a little bit of a challenge. It's easy to do, but that's how you generally prune those particular raspberries. I usually take the easy approach and just hack them all down. But this year, I'm going to, at least one end of my raspberry patch, I'm going to let them continue to grow. I'm not going to cut them down, just to see if my current new garden is susceptible to the raspberry cane borer, if they're already here. And if they're not here, then next year I'll leave more of the canes up so that I can get 2 harvests. But if I find out this year that the borers are there, then in the future, every year I'll just hack them down. That's what I did at my last garden. Let's just hack them down every year. Okay, let's see what else we have. Ionia says blackberries and strawberries are coming this week. Awesome. I did not actually get my blackberries. I had planned to get some blackberries this year, but the bed that I'm planning to put them in, I don't have ready yet. So I'm a little bit jealous of you that you've got blackberries coming, because that was my original plan, was to have blackberries this year, but didn't follow through and make it happen in the area that I want to put the blackberries. My garden plan has modified, and I was just corresponding with a viewer today about planning. And so if you go back 2.5 years to when I was developing the plan for my current garden, and I made videos about it, I had a section of the garden for raspberries and I had a section of the garden for blackberries. Well, the area that I had intended for blackberries in front of the greenhouse, I've now modified my plan to put a mandala garden, a completely different type of decorative garden. And so that's why I'm not doing blackberries, because that area that I was planning to do blackberries, I've modified my plan. And now I've got to pick a new area for the blackberries, and that's why I've got to prepare it. So the reason I say that is, as you're choosing your varieties and planning your garden, be flexible. You can change your plan every year. You don't have to stick to it. And even though I'm trying to stick to my long-range plan as much as possible, I'm modifying it every year. And one of the modifications is that I still don't have the blackberries in the garden. So that will come. So let's see if there's another one. I think I've covered all of the ones that I wanted to. I of course grow lots of other types of plants, but the ones I've covered today are the ones that are my favorites, the ones that I always grow year in and year out. Most of the others, they're not as important, or I don't see that big a difference in a particular type of plant. And so I'll just continue growing different types, different varieties, until I find one that I do like particularly. And so Zara's Garden says, I change my plan every few minutes. Nothing wrong with that either. And that's some of the fun of gardening is definitely changing. Bud says, go with thornless blackberries. They're less aggressive and take a while to get established, but are so nice when picking. I've had some thornless before. The issue I'm having right now, and I've actually got a couple different types picked out, but when you look into the thornless blackberries, most of the varieties that are out there are for zone 6 and above. And in my zone 5 garden, I tried growing some thornless blackberries that didn't make it past the second winter. But in a different area, or a different garden where I was growing the blackberries along a fence, the same thornless varieties actually did pretty well. So this gets to the discussion of microclimates. So I've discovered in my area that I can grow some of those thornless varieties next to a fence that gets the reflective heat of the sun during the winter, but I can't grow them in open ground because my winters are just too cold. And so that I'm still trying to figure out exactly which variety. So I appreciate your inputs, because that is the way I would like to grow, is to go with the thornless, especially with the granddaughters being able to harvest the blackberries. And thornless are so much easier to do it once they get established. But haven't fully figured out which varieties I'm going to go with and exactly where I'm going to go. But good suggestion. So as we're doing this, and as I throw out these varieties that I like, and I've mentioned this a couple times already, I think it's okay for you to disagree with me. And I encourage that you find a better option that works best for you. In my recent video, I mentioned this last week, where I was saying that if you have limited space, if you have limited time, if you have a short growing season, maybe there are some plants that you shouldn't be growing because there are better options, and you don't want to waste your time and space and energy on something you're not going to have success with. That was the intent of that video. And one of the examples I used, and I've said it before, watermelons. Here in Colorado, with our short season, you can't grow big watermelons. Those big 10-pound watermelons you get at the store, you can't grow those here in Colorado. But the number of people that have commented saying, oh, I disagree with you. Here in Florida, those watermelons do great. Or here in Texas, or here in Southern California, I grow a ton of those watermelons. Well, of course, that's the whole point. If you're in Florida or Texas or California, Southern California, you can grow a big watermelon. I can't here in Colorado. I can grow the small melons, the sun and stars. I have actually had some pretty good success with, but they're very small, not much bigger than a softball. And so disagree with me. I encourage you to disagree with me, but I'm trying to get all of you, and myself included, becoming better gardeners every single day. And so, I'm not specifically referring to any particular video, but what I would love for all of you to be able to do at some point is to disagree with what I'm saying. But disagree not because of the obvious. If I say don't grow watermelons, and because it takes a long season, and because it takes a lot of space, and that's why I don't grow it, I would prefer that you do one of a couple things. First off, don't just blindly follow my advice and say, okay, well, Gardener Scott says not to grow watermelons, so I'm not going to grow watermelons. I encourage you, don't do that. What I encourage that you do is say, I would really like to grow watermelons. I have a short season. I have limited space. How can I modify my gardening to grow watermelons? And so then if you send me that message that says, Gardener Scott, I disagree about growing watermelons because I put a bed in the hottest part of my garden. I identify that as a microclimate that has a longer season than any other part of my garden. And I put up a trellis and grew those watermelons vertically so that the leaves were getting sun throughout the day more than any other area of my garden. And I chose a variety that wasn't 120 days, and it fit with my shorter growing season. So I disagree with you because I can grow watermelons in a Zone 5 garden with a short season. Beautiful. That's the whole point. That's exactly what I'm hoping all of us can do, is reach that point where you look beyond the simplicity of growing plants and your own specific garden. You look at your limitations, and you might not be able to grow something right now. Or you hear me say, grow this variety or don't grow that other kind of plant. And you say, okay, I guess that makes sense because he knows what he's talking about. No, disagree with me, challenge me, find a way to prove me wrong. And don't prove me wrong because you're in Florida and I'm in Colorado. Prove me wrong because you're also in Colorado and you've figured out how to do it. Or you're in Minnesota, or you're in Iowa, or you're in Oregon, or you're in wherever. You're in a place that is challenging to grow that plant and you've figured out how to do it. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. That is the kind of thing I think you should shout to the heavens. And that's what I'm trying to encourage. So I hope all of you at some point can have that kind of success where you go against all of our recommendations, all of we YouTube creators that say you should or you shouldn't. You figure out what works best for you and you take all of this knowledge that we're sharing every single Monday and you figure out how to make it work in your garden. I think that's absolutely wonderful. So I look forward to hearing that. And I got some of those in that video in particular. I got some of those comments that said, I have to disagree with you because, and then they explained how they were doing it. And they were exactly right. They could do it by following all of those specific steps in their area. The point of that video was, if you don't have that time and experience, you might not want to grow that plant. But once you feel that you have reached that point, that your experience allows you to challenge yourself, go for it. Do it. Make it happen. And then tell me about it. How I'm wrong when I say you can't accomplish this thing. Well, yeah, brand new gardener with one or two beds might not be able to attempt it, but you in those same one or two beds after 2 or 3 or 4 years of experience and figuring out how to do it can do it. I think that's beautiful. And I hope you'll share some of those stories with me in the future because I think that's what we should all be working toward, is becoming that kind of gardener that can challenge the accepted median of gardening, where sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but for you, it works all the time. And that's where you develop your favorite varieties and your favorite methods of growing. And I hope some of the stuff we've covered today gives you some ideas to move in that direction. I'll be here again next Monday. I hope you're here again next Monday. It's always a great way to start the gardening week. And I hope you have a wonderful gardening week. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.